AI is the perfect profit machine. So if we think these companies that have this powerful tool are not going to employ it to reduce their largest cost, which is their human resources, we're living in a Pollyanna world. And that is the reality. And we either need to start building to get ahead of that, or we're going to find ourselves with a wave of workers, both white collar and blue, that don't have the next job to get trained to go into and need to be builders and are not yet equipped to do so. So let's get busy building.
Presented by Zapier, the AI automation company.
Hello and welcome to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast, the show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that could fit around a dinner table. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and wait a second. Yes, you heard that right. What you might have thought was the Exponential Scale podcast is now the Small Team, Big Scale podcast. Why? Well, lots of reasons, but the biggest reason is that people are wondering there's lots of ways to exponentially scale, and people launching rockets to Mars and to the moon will tell you that that's their way of doing it. And of course, we'll tell you, well, that's not the only way of doing it. There's lots of ways of scaling. And the big thing is, how can you scale without having to raise $1 bajillion of capital and hire 1 bajillion people? And that's what this podcast is all about. So I figured, hey, let's put that writing right on the tin. So it's Small Team, Big Scale podcast. Let's keep this growing and showing. But I am so excited because we have a fantastic guest. It's a great time to have that rebrand because we're talking with Donna Harris, who's the CEO and co-founder of Builders and Backers and was co-founder as well of 1776. Hi, Donna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Ron. Good to see you. Good. And I'm glad I could join.
Yeah, maybe first, by way of introduction, before I get into the meat of it, maybe talk a little bit about your background, because you've been in this entrepreneurial space for a while. We've actually interacted back in the past when I was doing tech breakfast and all sorts of things. We're kind of in the same general geographic area. So maybe introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, it's been a while for sure. I'll date myself. I'm a 6-time founder, 2-time venture capitalist, prolific angel investor, turned advocate for startups everywhere. And I've been in this racket for over 30 years, pre-.com. I've had high-flying successes and dumpster fire failures and everything in between. So I have been likely where many of your listeners are sitting now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we've all had, hey, you gotta go with the failures to get to the successes. And what got my attention was Donna recently posted something on LinkedIn that dug into some recent Kauffman Foundation reporting on the state of entrepreneurship and employment. So we have some data now, not just feelings, we got data. Data's good, and it's based on U.S. Census and Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which the Kauffman Foundation in turn generated their own insights and put together their report, and then Donna in turn provided her own insights and reports on what does this really mean. And so for those of you who are listening or watching the podcast, I'm going to link to it, but let me summarize a bit. So the real question is, what if the startup economy's foundational premise, which is that more startups means more jobs, is increasingly not necessarily what's happening, or at least what's not happening lately. So this piece that she wrote, a LinkedIn article called More Startups, Fewer Jobs, points that sharp pin at the entrepreneurial balloon. And this is what she said. She said, while startup formation is rising, the economic impact per startup appears to be falling. And that should be force a serious rethink of what kind of entrepreneurship economy we're actually building. So more founders, less impact, at least employment impact. So for 15 years, the startup economy operated on a relatively stable assumption, more startups equals more jobs. But the newest Kauffman data suggests that the relationship is weakening. Yes, we have more founders, but we're producing fewer jobs per founder. Startup job creation peaked in 1997 at 7.9 jobs per 1,000 people. And in 2025, that figure sits at 5.3, a decline of roughly 1/3. And that's before we even start seeing the impact of AI. So increasingly, entrepreneurship may be functioning not only as a pathway to company creation, but a form of economic adaptation, building careers and piecing together income from freelancing, side income, self-employment, contract work, and greater autonomy in a more fragmented labor market. And many of these new businesses may never have been designed to become employer firms at all. But over time, the ecosystem became optimized for this narrower definition of entrepreneurial success, which was the venture capital unicorn dreams route, right? Well, I actually editorialized a little bit there, but like just specifics, you said the definition of entrepreneurial success, outsized venture returns. And that matters because economic systems produce what they are designed to reward. So long story short, and sort of summarize here, the question is no longer simply how do we create more startups? It is, what kind of entrepreneurship economy are we actually optimizing for? So Donna, maybe get into it a little bit. I provided a little insight here, but what is it that you were seeing in the data? What is this getting you thinking about? And what does this mean, especially for small team scalers who are looking at building big and avoiding the hiring perspective altogether?
Well, there's so many things that I think are coming together in this one moment, right? We have those of us that have been in ecosystem building and startup support for a long time, have been very interested in the idea that we want to make our cities great places for anybody who wants to start a company. But increasingly, those activities are things like pitch competitions and let's get angel groups together and how much capital are our startups raising. And we started to look at this about 5 years ago and questioned, where is the local economic impact of this work? How many of those companies are durable? What jobs are they creating? And seeing a lot of churn going on in the ecosystem, right? So not only like the failure rate, but the flailing rate. Lots and lots of people sort of trying their hand at it and not really finding their way to success and a narrow definition of success. And so if we think about, you've got a decade and a half of ecosystem building that has increasingly looked like, how do we help our companies raise capital? You have the emergence of AI, which is having an enormous amount of economic pressure on jobs and people's ability to generate value for themselves and their families. And all of this is creating an interesting moment where more people want to be entrepreneurs, maybe even out of necessity, and they're not necessarily getting help to be successful in that, right? They're showing up and we sort of have this mismatch between the people that are starting and the kinds of things they need help with versus what it is we're actually equipped to do to help them. And this is a really critical moment, right? I mean, if we relied on startups to create the jobs our economy needed 15 years ago, and they're creating 1/3 less jobs today, and that's going to accelerate with AI, then we need exponentially more startups to have the same impact on people's ability to make a living in life. So it is a necessity that we get not only exponentially more people starting companies, those companies are by their very nature going to be much smaller, and we need more of them, and we need more of them to succeed. And as somebody that wants to help make that happen, it has to force a rethink on what are the things that we're spending time doing and what do these founders actually need? What is going to be the biggest lever that we could pull here? And yes, things like pitch competitions and convenings and events are important, but they need some hands-on help. They need people who've done this before telling them, do this, don't do that. Honest guardrails, your best friend will tell you when you have spinach in your teeth kind of conversations. And we aren't necessarily having a lot of those in-depth conversations with individual founders across the country. It's very much the sort of rah, let's go try our hand in entrepreneurship. And that's why we have a lot of people starting, but we also have a high failure rate, which continued to increase.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. I mean, people start something new. It's so hard to take something from nothing and make it something, and then make it that something and make it sustainable something. I think part of this is that entrepreneurship, by its nature, I think it's definitely changed over the last, let's look a little broader, 100 years, like maybe 200 years, right? 100 years ago or so, it was like Main Street. Main Street was thriving. It was a lot of self-employed people, a lot of small business, mom and pop shops, right? Small business Main Street. And that actually, like a lot of small towns were powered by that. And that's because we didn't have the internet, so we didn't have a global economy. We had ecosystems where it was highly localized, so highly localized production, highly localized farming even. Everything was like in your immediate region because transportation was difficult and very expensive. We didn't have container ships, all this sort of stuff, right? So the global economy now really has put a lot of pressure there. However, technology now, I think, is reversing some of that and is putting a lot of that power back into the individual's hands. I think some of this is challenged, I think, by the data itself and the definitions of entrepreneurship, because on the one hand, we have entrepreneurship from that raising capital, trying to start something big, trying to hire a lot of people. And then we have entrepreneurship more from the self-employment perspective. If I said self-employed, people might be thinking some of those things that are in the data, which are the gig economy stuff, the Etsy shops, the side hustles, the gig workers, all that sort of stuff. And I think this is kind of where the data doesn't really help us make a clarification. So I'm wondering to what extent we can derive sort of the health of the overall entrepreneurship from data that's sort of mixing, self-employed people who are doing something to make a buck versus people who are trying to build something that has that scaling impact that may have a more outweighed impact on the economy.
Yeah. Well, the story that we're telling around entrepreneurship as a country is one that is very much the tech narrative, right? We've got Shark Tankification of America. We all watch where somebody brings their product and it's all about getting capital, right? And when you go into any ecosystem across the country, you're going to find a pitch competition, right? It's really become so central to our narrative about how we see entrepreneurship. And we often forget that last year, only 10,500 companies in the United States got venture capital funding, right? So almost 5 million people formed intention to start a company applications with the federal government, and only 10,000 people took venture capital. So we have a very big mismatch between our aspirations as a country versus this one narrow lens of entrepreneurship. And when you think about, even back to the early 1900s, right? I mean, there are two forms of entrepreneurship. There's opportunity entrepreneurship and there's necessity entrepreneurship. And you had the railroad barons and you had the building the infrastructure that recognized the opportunity of the moment, and they built and they were massively scalable things. But you also had everyday Americans who were like, let me open the store on the corner. I'm opening a grocery shop. I'm a blacksmith. I'm whatever. And I think that we often think about the digital economy through the lens of more like the modern day railroad analogy. But I think it's a really interesting moment to mash up the industrial and the agricultural society in that people want a return to local roots. They're interested in solving problems in their local community. There's a recognition that we want to know our neighbors. We want to build things that maybe give us more control. We see a very big pushback among everyday people around the venture capital-esque narrative of entrepreneurship. We very much encounter people that are like, that's great, but maybe not for me. And is there another way I can do this? And we would not have heard that narrative, 5, 8 or so years ago. And the beautiful part is that's all possible today. I mean, we meet founders that they're 1, 2, 3 people, as you say, sitting around a dining room table. They're building with AI agents and contractors and freelancers and the tools that are out there, and they don't need or want big teams. They don't need or want the unicorn pathway. And I think it's really important for us to understand the data that even though we glamorize venture capital, it is more often than not, the founders do not get significant returns themselves from those VC-backed companies. The spoils go mostly to the investors.
That's right.
And the sort of sheen is off the bloom is off the rose, so to speak, for a lot of folks that are like, wait a minute, why is this the generally accepted narrative for this when now today there truly is a different way to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually had a very interesting conversation with Miko Matsumura, who's a great investor at Gumi. He's in the Web3 crypto space, but he's saying even in his spaces, he's like, I don't know about this long-term sustainability, even as an investor, if it makes sense. Yeah, the number of winners is so small, and the number of winning VC firms, most VC firms themselves, that's not a great business. It's like a handful of venture capital firms generate most of the returns. The rest are money losers. You're better off putting money as a person who invests in a venture capital firm in the market, index fund. You'll get a better rate of return. These guys are sitting on 10-year funds, and basically making money off of money management. They're basically money managers more than they're business owners. And I think that's the other thing I think that's part of the pushback. Also, when I was talking with Miko Matsumura, he goes, people keep saying VC is evil. It's not evil. I'm like, well, I'm not going to use the term evil or good. Those are weird terms to use. But what people are looking at, they're not looking at venture capital, they're looking at the outcomes of venture capital. And what they say, why is it that when all of a sudden this company raises a lot of money, all of a sudden the features get worse, the company things get more expensive, all of a sudden what was free is no longer free, and don't even bring up the term private equity because that has such a negative connotation now. So if we put that aside and say, well, part of the reason why that got so much interest is there was a lot of glamorization of venture capital, the movies, Social Network, Shark Tank, Silicon Valley, the HBO show made it seem like that was the path. If you're not doing that, you're not doing startupism is what we called it. But I think maybe part of it is, and maybe this is part of your role here, is that we need to educate people and inform people that there is another sustainable path. That sustainable path does lead to great personal enrichment and growth, but does not necessarily mean that you need to tie yourself to the yoke of venture capital. So I know I said a lot there, but I'm guessing you're probably hearing much of the same.
We are. And look, when I started my first company ages ago, I wanted to be able to bootstrap my company, which is was easier to do back then when you were a services company. You go and you sell a services contract and you deliver a services contract. That's not really very scalable. But if you wanted to build a product company, it was very hard to do it without outside capital. That was just the nature of the game. If you wanted to build a product company, you had to invest in building that product before you had the revenue typically to cover that. So the idea that you can bootstrap your company was kind of not necessarily all that true for most Americans. Fast forward to where we are today, right? You got a $30 Claude subscription, you got Canva, you got a couple of tools that help you put a landing page up, you got a couple other tools that help you do, AI generated UGC to do lead generation. And the next thing you know, you're running a successful revenue generating, probably profitable company. And you may or may not later decide to raise capital, but you put control in your own hands, right? It gives you optionality. So for those of us that have been in this world for 30 years, the utopia that we have been aiming for is here. The challenge is that not enough people understand that this is possible, that they can do it. The infrastructure that we have built doesn't necessarily celebrate this, teach this, show people how to do it. And this is the opportunity we think of the moment. We can change that. And it's not an anti-VC narrative. It's not an anti-pitch competition. There are very specific cases where those vehicles make sense. But people have to recognize venture capital used to be the early risk-taking idea on a napkin kind of capital. It is not. The bar for raising venture capital is extremely high right now. So the ability to actually build a company that way, it's a very narrow kind of company.
Yeah. I mean, we joke all the time. It's like you can make $1 million tomorrow if you want to sell gasoline for $1 a gallon, but you're going to lose $3 a gallon in the process. Right. So, you can't just look at the top side.
The math's got a math somewhere.
Exactly. But when we were talking, it makes me wonder a little bit about this venture capital thing. I'm like, well, what exactly, when the VCs push back and say, show me your business plan, tell me about your traction, give me all the support that says, how is this business going to make money? How are we going to grow? What's the exit plan? At the same time, to just throw all of that out the window and say, I guess I'll invest in your company because it's getting all the memes, it's getting all the attention, and maybe we'll just ride this horse and cross our fingers and there'll be an exit. That's what it seems like, honestly. Like 80% of the time, like the people they really invest in have nothing to do with the underlying economics of the business itself. It's completely divorced from the business. And the one thing we talked about with Miko is that when you're an entrepreneur and you're raising venture capital, you're not actually selling the product you're selling to your customers. What you're selling is your equity. That's the product. And that's all they care about is, can you make your equity increase? They could care less about the customers, care less about the employees, and less about the sustainability. So, I mean, has things changed? Is that where things are at right now with venture capital?
It is an interesting moment. It is, I think there's a tale of two or maybe more than two worlds here. Right? You've got this moment where there's a lot of question around what's actually scalable. What does the economy look like 10 years from now? And what are the important elements of that economy that I, as an investor, want to own, right? I mean, the goal is to figure out what does tomorrow's business and consumer world need and build it and own it, because that's where I'm going to get returns. And nobody quite knows what that's going to look like. So you see a lot of just, I don't call it spray and pray, but definitely a lot of this looks buzzy. This looks like it's getting traction. We ought to be behind that. And then you do have some investors that are throwing, heavy dollars at the like infrastructure underneath what tomorrow's economy looks like. But the thing that I want everyday entrepreneurs to realize is that for the most part, venture capital is increasingly growth capital, not idea capital. And that's why you get a lot of questions around traction and buzziness and followers. And even a firm like Polja that, they got a lot of attention and a lot of followers, and people don't necessarily want to miss out on investing in things like that. Now, as an LP, that sounds a lot more like gambling than it sounds like strategic investing, which, is kind of true. But I think everybody's banking on the fact that there's so much money to be made in this AI gold rush that there's kind of okay with a little bit of that, put the chips down on a lot of different crazy squares and hope for returns.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of money to be made at the other end of the market where you don't need to run a $1 billion company to make a really good living right now, right? I mean, name an expertise that you have, something you enjoy, a hobby, your work. You can build a business in that arena if you spend enough time thinking about the problems that exist and the ways AI could build something entirely new in that slice of the economy. And you don't need to know how to start a startup. You don't need to have any technical skills. And frankly, you don't need more than, candidly, a few $100 in the bank to pay for some of these subscriptions in the early days of the thing you're building.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is great because you actually posted something recently that supports that. And that is that you stopped, the thing that you posted that kind of stopped me was that people without a high school diploma are now starting businesses at more than twice the rate of college graduates.
That's right. That's right. It's so fascinating. Yeah. But I think there's two pieces to that story. There's the exciting, oh, wow, that's fabulous story because we're democratizing entrepreneurship and more people are doing it. But it is also the necessity-based entrepreneurship, the fact that the very AI tools we're talking about in this world of innovation, they're taking people's jobs. And this is not so much, I have an idea, let me go pursue the opportunity, but more, how do I make ends meet? And I'm stringing together different businesses and things that I'm leading and owning and starting, as opposed to getting a job. And I do think that is the bigger story here, that if you look at the industrial era that we have lived in for the last, 100 plus whatever years, we are now moving into a very different era. And the industrial era was all about jobs. You got a job at a big company, you worked that job, you worked your way up the ladder. Somebody else was in charge of the thing. And we posit that the digital economy, we need to stop being job people and we need to start being idea people. And it's a very different skill set. Everybody needs to learn it, whether or not you ever want to launch a company or not. Entrepreneurial thinking and doing is one of the most important skills that every single human on this planet needs to master at this moment.
Yeah, that is so prescient. I have to tell you that that is the core of everything, because once we start disconnecting from the future of people's personal income is tied to employment, which is tied to jobs, but jobs are becoming increasingly less secure, and actually self-employment is becoming increasingly easier and more secure. There's no guarantees in life. They're both fairly insecure, to be totally honest, right? Even government jobs, which were supposedly the land of the sure thing, I think the last couple of years has proven to everybody in the DC region that there ain't no such thing as a sure thing, even in federal employment. So I think this is really interesting to me. That's why when I was looking at the data and I saw, maybe we can underline this before we sort of move on to the next point, is that if more people are becoming founders and more people are becoming enabled to become self-employed, whether by choice or by necessity, but either case, they're being enabled to do so, is that actually a good thing for the economy? And the bigger question is, all these assumptions we've made in our economy, even in our K through 12 education and the college higher employment pipeline, a lot of which is underscored by we are preparing people for the workplace. It calls so much of that completely into question. Policy questions of how we incentivize companies, what we reward companies for, tax breaks. This is like humongously impactful, this whole transition. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's the part that I really wish people understood is we're very myopically focusing on the tool, and we should be focusing on the bigger shift here, which is that this is a massive dislocation of the economy and society and all the structures of it. And a lot of what we're seeing in politics and the divisiveness of the country and in the economics and across sort of all of aspects of our society, they're birthing pains, right? Like they're evidence that something dramatic is changing here. And by their very nature, that is uncomfortable. It's painful. It's requiring letting go of the old and building the new. And like anybody would naturally be, we're very focused on the pain of the moment. And we need to also be focused on building the next. And that isn't just, oh, company X needs to be replaced by company Y in this new AI form. It is everything in society, our tax structure, our government, our personal agency, right? We were taught the idea that you don't really have a lot of agency. You're going to go get a job. You're going to work for somebody else. Somebody's going to make those decisions and you're going to abide by them as an employee. And then we're going to retrain you for your next job. And all of that potentially goes away. And when the ball's in your court and you've lived 40, 50 years of your life being told what to do by other people and institutions, these are difficult things to learn. And this is the thing that when I stepped away from my prior job, I took a sabbatical to do the research that became Builders and Backers. And I would hear everyone across the country talk about problems they cared about, ideas they had for solving them. But when I asked them about why they weren't taking action, they would say, well, somebody should do something about fill in the blank. Well, who is the somebody? The somebody needs to be each of us. But when we talk about entrepreneurship being the tool to take action, they would say, oh, I'm not a Elon Musk. I'm not a Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I'm just a nurse. I'm a teacher. And that is exactly who needs to learn how to be building in today's economy, right? You even look at nurses, right? The idea that you would go and work for a hospital. Now you have traveling nurses. You have nurses that have formed their own business and they're piecing together different engagements with different hospitals and different organizations. Like, it's the same underlying thing that is happening, which is a shift in agency from the institution to the individual. And it's never been more important that we enable that and we teach that and that we redirect dollars towards that and that becomes the incentive. And so when we talk with ecosystem leaders and economic developers across the country, we say, yes, you want to focus on ventures that are being created, but you want to talk about this through a talent formation lens, because the very people that you need starting startups are currently today employed by the institutions in your cities that likely won't be employing them going forward.
Yeah. There's so much tied into this because politics and employment and jobs and wealth, they go a lot of ways. On the one hand,
there's nothing thorny in that list of topics.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have the populism and you have, catering to the people who are backing your campaign. You have campaign finance, so much. I'm not going to get into all of that. This is not a politics podcast, but it's kind of hard to disentangle all of that. So bringing it back, one of the things that sort of like the light bulb moment for us, like when you're at Scalebrate. So for those of you who are listening, don't know what the heck Scalebrate is, we're just an organization, association of small team founders. And our theory is that if we just band together, if we can group together, we can accomplish more together than we can alone. But there's this interesting mindset shift. So become a member. That's all I'm going to say. Become a member, and we'll find ways to tie into organizations like Builders and Backers because we need to expand the knowledge pool because that's not our focus, is growing the knowledge pool. But the reason why I mention that is as more people become self-employed, become aware of themselves, they tend to want to work with other people that are like them. Because it used to be the power balance was if you're a small company and you're operating by yourself, you have to sell to somebody. So if you're trying to sell, well, the consumer angle has been solved to a certain extent because now we have Shopify, we have Amazon. So you can build. We just had an interview with Max Kang who's selling 8 figures worth of sticker books. It's crazy. $10 million plus of sticker books on Amazon, direct to consumer, 5 employees. His margin is crazy high. And so he's doing it. He's like, why do I need to hire anymore? I'm like, this is great. And he's also saying, I don't need to be a $1 billion company too. That's the other insight. He's like, I don't even know if I need to be a 9-figure company. I'm perfectly happy making 8 figures, at this nice margin with just a couple of people. Why change? So the direct to consumer, the B2C has been solved. The B2B is the part that a lot of people are wondering. How do I sell to other businesses? How do I sell to governments? But as we get more and more atoms, right? Instead of large companies, we get a lot more small companies. It's becoming more of a sort of a different I guess the best way to put it is the question is like, it becomes a different ecosystem, right? So to your point, for the last, I don't know, 20, maybe 30 years, that ecosystem was very funding venture capital associated. If you were not reading Hacker News and doing Y Combinator and Startup School and pitch competitions, you are probably not doing something. But now we need something else. We need something that replaces the Y Combinators and the pitch competitions because that doesn't feel right to small businesses who what we really need is networks and connections and, business relationships.
Yeah. And I would say not so much to replace, but to supplement, because what's happened is we've looked at entrepreneurship and said, oh, Y Combinator, Techstars, those are the, holy grail of what we want our founders to be able to accomplish. And so let's emulate that on a local level. And what we haven't done is focus on some of the core things that founders need most if they're going to create durable companies. And the fact that, the average Y Combinator cohort is a handful of people out of the thousands and thousands and thousands of applications they get worldwide. And so the thing that founders need the most is, they need to focus less on raising money and more on how do we teach them to learn quickly, less on sort of the infrastructure of company building because this is what companies look like, and more on building a customer base, generating revenue, right? When you get revenue generating and you're profitable and you have evidence that people want to build your product, guess what? That gives you optionality, like you just described, gives you choices, gives you the ability to raise capital if you want to, but also to not raise capital if you choose not to. And that's the thing I tell founders all the time is that, one-person firms can accomplish things that were impossible for a solo entrepreneur just a few years ago. So focus primarily on customers, revenue. That gets you optionality to do any and all of the other things you might want to do with the thing that you've built.
Yeah, I would imagine one of the questions you get a lot, or one of the feedback you must get a lot, is not just the I don't really know how to do entrepreneurship. You were talking a little bit about that. Me, entrepreneur, I don't know how. I don't know what I'm doing. So you can answer a lot of that. But of course, the second part is, of course, part of the reason why people want to raise money is because they need the support. A lot of them feel that this is the entrepreneurship by necessity part. Well, they have no other income. So, but for the people who want to do it because they're actually interested, they really want to do it. There's a lot of that same hesitancy. So if we're what is sort of the counterweight or the counterbalance to the traditional funding route? A long time ago, it was banks, right? Banks would give loans, and I guess you'd give them your business plan and they'd do something and they'd give you a loan. You had to pay it back, right? It wasn't equity and interest. But what is there any counterweight now, or is it just either financing through venture capital and you got to go that path, or is it financing through banks, or is it scraping together your own money or financing through customers? What are the real approaches here?
It's a great question. And you're spot on, right? In the early days of entrepreneurships, we had local banks, and those local banks had relationships with you, right? You knew your banker. They went to the Elks Lodge with you, and you volunteered together on the Saturday donut breakfast, whatever's, right? We were very deeply rooted in our communities, and that meant that it became easier to get the kind of relational funding that is necessary when there's risk in a new business. But banks consolidated. They moved away from local communities. They moved away from, the kinds of funding that used to exist from banks dried up. And not a lot replaced it until venture capital came in. And what we have recognized is that this is actually where an enormous gap is, because while we talk about people raising, $500,000, multi-million-dollar rounds, you don't actually need that much capital to get started, right? You need probably a few $1,000s to run low fidelity experiments to see if people will buy the thing you want to build, right? You got to get a few tools, you got to pay for some landing pages and some pop-up events or some ad campaigns to see if you can actually acquire users. And for most Americans, they have less than $4,000 in their savings account. They don't have credit available to them. It's actually why we launched our Pebble Fund. It is experimentation stage capital. Up to $5,000 will cover the cost of all that low fidelity experimentation for you to test your idea. And then you probably need a little bit of additional capital to launch and begin operations. Again, you don't need a couple 100,000. You probably need 25 to 50K to begin building a lean AI first organization. And that's where our conviction capital comes in. We help you launch, we help you experiment. If it looks like there's a there and the dogs are eating the dog food, then you can apply for additional funding and we'll help you get off to the races. And later you can raise additional funding if you want, but it's enough to get you from, zero to go and begin generating revenue. But there's a very clear methodology that we advocate in order to do those things, right? It's very experimentation first. Don't build a lot of company infrastructure. You don't need to incorporate and pick your URL and get your t-shirts at all until you actually figure out what it is that people are going to buy from you. And you can do a lot of that before you do any of those things. And it's for people who go, oh, I don't necessarily need to build that traditional pathway, which it turns out there's millions and millions and millions of people who want to build this new way. So it's a gap that we encourage communities to try to close. We're by no means going to solve this problem ourselves. So there are great people that are helping communities spin up local community funds that are not necessarily VC centric. And to be clear, we do venture capital investing as part of our stack of capital, but we'll also do revenue-based lending for companies that are not VC appropriate, right? The goal is to sort of put the capital cart back behind the horse. Let's figure out what it is you need funding to accomplish, and let's give you the right kind of funding to do that, as opposed to trying to shoehorn the square peg into the round hole of your VC or else there's nothing else available to you.
Yeah. Well, can I ask some details of how that works? So the $5,000 fund, I forget the name of the fund.
The Pebble Fund.
Pebble Fund. That's good. Yeah, start with Pebbles. So, how does that work? Is it a grant? Is that equity? Is that the revenue based financing? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually fund it via our builder studio. So you get in, you start building, you get to the place where you're ready to begin running low fidelity experiments, you submit a proposal. And we review those proposals. The ones that get approved get Pebble funding. You will actually get a builders and backers card. It's in our name, not yours. You don't have to be credit worthy. And it's tied to the categories that your budget was submitted to. So if you told us you were going to run a landing page test and you needed to have 4 tools to do that and some money to run a Facebook campaign, then those are the categories that you'll be able to use your card to do. And it allows you to immediately begin executing that experiment without worrying about checks getting cashed and taxes and all the things. And we require that you share the results of that experiment with us so we can help you evaluate what you learned and what comes next. And it's what we call inception stage equity. And it is a future promise to repay a certain multiple of that funding or convert that into equity if you launch a company is commercializable off of your idea.
Okay, great. So it starts as sort of it's interesting. It's a grant, but it's in the form of a restricted use debit or credit card or something like a payment card. And then if you fail, you fail. that happens, right? That life happens, right? But if you succeed, I guess, is it sort of like a hard promise, or is it more of just a sort of a ethical, moral commitment to pay it forward, pay it back? I don't know how it would work. So,
Yeah, it is. It is a hard promise.
okay.
The result is, look, if we give you, call it $5,000, and you run an experiment and it turns out there's a lot of opportunity to build a business from that, we want to participate a little bit, not a lot, a little bit in the upside of doing that. And the only reason we want to do that is that the returns from all the Pebble Fund investments fuel additional Pebble Funds. So it, for us, is an evergreen way to fund more builders. Your success isn't funding me. I'm already a successful investor, and easier ways for me to make a living than doing what I'm doing right now. But it is to fuel your neighbor's experiment and the next person behind you's entrepreneurial dream.
Yeah, it reminds me there's a firm out there. I think like State Street Capital. Like there's something that had like a different model, different version of that. And I kind of wonder how they're doing. I'll have to check on them. The second question, of course, is sort of, I know we've kind of gone off topic here, but this is good. It has to do with sort of why people need money. And part of it is they need money because the cost of operations and so all the stuff you were talking about, the landing page and this and that. But the other reason, of course, is because I need to support, to basically they need to make a living. They need to support their own expenses. So this is especially the case, people who are forced into entrepreneurship. It's not because they're trying to come up with an idea and maybe they think it's going to be the next big thing. They're like, I got to support myself. I have to pay the rent, got to pay the food, whatever the family life is. And so for them, it's like the money is so that they can afford to do the entrepreneur. So how does that gap get?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is one area for policymakers to take a really close look. If we reimagine entrepreneurship through a talent activation and an economic activity, as opposed to entrepreneurship equals growth and returns, it can equal those things. But if we take a different approach and we think about it as a talent strategy, we ought to be thinking about things like apprenticeship funds and alternative things that give people runway to be able to try these things. And, it always amazes me when we talk about this, because we look at all the studies and go, the number one source of job creation across the last however many decades has been startups. It is the single most important economic activity we can undertake. But we kind of force people to look under the sofa cushions for nickels and dimes to make it work. And that always amazes me. If we actually believe this is the number one most important economic activity, we ought to be funding it like it's the number one most important economic activity. And I don't think that there's been enough deep thinking about what that means. We've largely translated that into, oh, great, let's go raise more venture capital funds. And that is not what that should mean. It should mean, why isn't there a fund in every community in America that allows people who are truly committed to a certain amount of time to build their ideas to be able to do that, and to do that with the right kind of support and training and guidance and hands-on building? It always amazes me that we aren't having that conversation. It's an enormous opportunity, I think, for policymakers.
Yeah, my gosh, I'm just grinning widely here because we're so in sync. I think we're at this moment where these conversations are all starting to come to the same place. We're all coming at it from our different perspectives. I'll bring something from the past here. It's always been my bugaboo. Donna and I, we live in the DC metro region. I'm actually in Maryland. I don't know if you're in DC or Northern Virginia, but we're all in the same general universe here, right? We're within one beltway or the other, right? And there was for those of you that may remember here, this will be a little tangent, but it'll be relevant, that there was a competition back in 2013, 14, I can't remember the exact year, when Amazon was going to build another headquarters, right? And there was this big fight. Every city wanted Amazon to build their HQ2 in their neighborhood because they looked at what Amazon's impact was on Seattle, and they just sort of imagined in their mind that there would be tens of thousands of employers and it would have that huge local impact, and there'd be all these local businesses glomming onto it. And they all just there was a fight. It's everybody wanted it. And Northern Virginia actually ended up winning out in the competition for HQ2. And of course, the story didn't actually go where it wanted. But states gave away so much, this is what I'm going to bring back, in tax incentives, that they were willing to throw millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on the future promise that in the general future, without any real concrete promises, that there would be this future win. And to your point, I'm like, why couldn't they, if the money was there for that, why is the money not there? Because the individual person doesn't need hundreds of millions of dollars. You could float a whole lot more boats. So if the money, if that was always my question, like, well, if the money was there for that, why is it not there for this? Is it, there's some psychological thing going on that I never quite understood. So I'm bringing that up from the past, but we lived it.
Yeah. I have been saying some version of that for probably the last 20 some odd years. And I come from Detroit. And when I started my first company in Detroit, I used to have all kinds of conversations with economic developers across the state of Michigan about why so much money was going to yet another automotive plant thing when our economy was so incredibly concentrated in a single industry and the risk that that presents and like there's something that I'll take from the world of dating and marriage, which is that people show you, not tell you, what they believe. And so when we think about where the money is flowing, the money is still flowing all these years later to very traditional economic development initiatives. Big companies recruit the HQ, set up the big plant because we think that we're going to get the jobs by the hundreds and thousands, as opposed to the sense that we're going to create these things from the bottom up. And underpinning that, I think, is a sense of potential doubt that we have the entrepreneurial talent, that we have the ideas, and that we can convert those ideas into new companies. And I think that's partly an evidence problem. We haven't necessarily shown in the last 15 years that the $1 trillion of investment we've made into startup building has translated into jobs. And so I think there's a data challenge, there's a storytelling challenge. I think we're fighting against decades of industrial era economic development policy. But I will say there are some people in the economic development world that are really thinking about this and understand this. And I think we're finally having the kinds of conversations that have the potential for this to change. And, you know, if ever there was a moment we ought and needed to have this conversation, it is right now, because if those jobs weren't getting created by the H2Qs and the Detroit auto suppliers all those years ago, they are definitely not coming in this AI-enabled world. And let's be clear, at the end of the day, we can argue and discuss about what AI does or doesn't do, but we live in an economy that is motivated by shareholder returns, and AI is the perfect profit machine. So if we think these companies that have this powerful tool are not going to employ it to reduce their largest cost, which is their human resources, we're living in a Pollyanna world. And that is the reality. And we either need to start building to get ahead of that, or we're going to find ourselves with a wave of workers, both white collar and blue, that don't have the next job to get trained to go into and need to be builders and are not yet equipped to do so. So let's get busy building.
I have a feeling that's going to be my podcast snippet.
I love that.
That was just fantastic. So I think it's a great place to sort of end things here. As mentioned, the LinkedIn post got my attention. There's data there. The data may need improvement, but I think that's part of the systemic issue, which is figuring out what we need to measure. So I'll ask you the final question, and then we'll get into our rapid fires, which I ask everybody. But this last point is that your post ends with a call to rethink what kind of entrepreneurship economy we are actually building. So if you could sort of rewrite that equation yourself, the previous equation was more startups equals more jobs. That may not be the right equation. What do you think the new equation should be?
Great question. I would say something along the lines of more talent activated equals more potential for everyone in our communities.
That's great. I love that. Potential is great. Potential energy. I just think so much of it. So
Yeah.
Our rapid fire questions. I always ask the same questions to everybody. So some may be applicable, some might not be. These are all usually asked to small team founders who are gaining a lot of leverage, but I'll ask them anyway. So the first one is about tools, think about this for yourself. So what is one AI tool or non-AI tool or automation that you absolutely can't run your business without? The one that gives you and your team the 10x leverage every single week.
Well, our own organization is a great example of the lean AI team. We use the tools across our organization, and our entire company does fit around a dining room table, which we will be doing on Tuesday. I would say this is actually why we built our Builder Studio AI platform, right? We're on a mission to help millions of people get started and get their dreams and entrepreneurial aspirations brought to life. We can't do that when we're working one-on-one and in small groups with expensive humans. So we've spent the last 18 months building something that truly helps more people do that. And it's letting us help thousands and thousands and thousands of people test their ideas, get customer feedback, generate revenue, and get to a scale that we could not if we were trying to do this with a big human team.
That's great. How big is the team now? Around the dinner table is fantastic. How big is the dinner table?
We're a team of 5, so there's extra chairs.
It's fantastic. As I say, people, it's like no need to ever apologize for the size of the team. It's always punching above your weight, which is fantastic. It's about the outcomes. So the next question is about processes. So what do you think is one system or process that you think every lean leverage first team should have in place by the time they hit their first $1 million in revenue? The one that separates what we call the scalers, the ones who are really getting good leverage for their time, the money, and all that sort of stuff, from the grinders. Like, you can get to $1 million if you grind hard, but to get to that second million, it's going to take twice as much grinding. So what process do you think they should have in place that will help them scale? Something maybe they should stop doing, or maybe something they should start doing today?
Yeah, it's spot on, right? I think the analysis of the $25 task, the $250 task, the $2,500 task, if you're the founder, you ought to be focusing on as many $25,000 decisions as possible. So I would say a system that constantly asks, not how do I work harder, but what should humans be doing at all? So unpacking the jobs to be done in your company and identifying where humans are inherently needed because they can do that job better than anything else, and it's inherently a human job. And if it is not an inherently human job that humans do better, then we ought to be looking at repeatable systems that engage AI and tools to do them.
Love it. That actually comes up quite a bit in our conversation. So standard operating procedures, jobs to be done. It's actually second or third time that's come up. It's fantastic. And of course, repeatable systems and making sure you're doing the high value stuff. Don't act like a robot. Robots are pretty good at that. And I guess the last tip is, last question, rapid fire here, is if you could give one piece of advice to a founder who's running that dinner table size team right now, who wants to scale, what would you share?
Yeah, I am a firm believer that when it comes down to it, we can actually do exponentially more than we think we can. So I would say asking yourself, if I had to double my revenue next year without adding a single employee, what would I do? And I think most founders don't have the answer to that question. And you should, because that becomes the lens that you should be focusing on, where you spend your time and where you don't spend your time. And if you analyze where we spend our time as a day, a lot of that gets wasted on stuff that is not high leverage for the business. And as a CEO, time is money, and you only have so much of it. So every minute that you're working ought to be high leverage towards what can actually double revenue. And in today's world, you can do a lot more than you think with the team that you have.
That's fantastic. So on point. Making me rethink the Exponential Scale rename, but I think that's okay. Exponential's outcomes from being a small team that's doing big scale. So thank you, Donna. This has been fantastic. Wonderful interview. I'm so glad I reached out to you. So glad you reached back. We were able to make this happen and really shine the light on probably one of the biggest things that's happening in this world. So I really appreciate you participating on this podcast.
I'm so glad I could come. Fun conversation, and definitely a moment that we want to get more people building. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to share this. So where to follow up? So if you loved this podcast and you want to dig deeper, have a couple of follow-up points for you. First of all, you should subscribe to the Builders Field Guide. That's something that Donna Harris shared with me. That's on LinkedIn and Substack. We'll provide that in the show notes. If you have an idea or an entrepreneurial aspiration, you should join Builder Studio. That's what we talked about here. Again, we'll provide the link in the show notes. World-class startup expertise, guidance, and funding. as Donna says, for the cost of Netflix. I checked, like $30 a month, something like that. So yeah, if you can afford the Netflix, you can do that. You could cut back on this. People say cut back on the Starbucks. I'm not much of a Starbucks drinker myself, but I hear you. The third thing you should do is follow Donna on social media. She is D Harris in DC pretty much everywhere. And Donna tells me something special here. If you follow her, there's a bonus. If you follow her and send a message to her with a mention of this podcast, that's the Small Team, Big Scale podcast. If you want to call it Exponential Scale podcast, she'll know what we're talking about as well. She will send you a coupon code for a 25% discount off Builder Studio. So find out. LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and TikTok. She's new there, so give her some grace. I don't really know. I don't do much TikTok. And so finally, we always end with a mantra. So here is your mantra for the week. Lean into the small team. That's another lean. If you want to think lean, you could be lean, but just lean into it, because the economy is starting to lean into it, and we should lean into it before it leans itself over. I think I overused that word just now. So if you loved this interview with Donna Harris, I want you to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share with that founder friend who's still thinking that starting their own thing and staying small might be a mistake when it's actually the biggest trend going on right now in entrepreneurship. So think big, stay lean, and scale smarter.
Small teams that scale big aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode has you inspired to learn more, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's SCALEBRATE.com. Until next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter, because small teams have mega potential. And thanks for tuning in to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast.